Hello friends, this is Growl. This is going to be a commentary over a 26 King's Rest we did last week during Fortified Sanguine Grievous. King's Rest won the vote for the most requested dungeons, so I thought this would be a good key to go over. This is going to be the first commentary key with my new versatility stacking build, so it'll be sort of a part 3 to my verse stacking video, although there isn't a whole lot that you change gameplay wise in keys. So right away, the first annoying thing that you have to deal with in this dungeon is these minions of Zool. They will fixate random players, and if they touch you, they will fear you, and you'll end up getting feared into these animated guardians. So what we do is we choose to use Shroud so that our Demon Hunter can get in the middle of all of them and use his Blood Elf Racial to dispel them. You can also use a Priest Mass to dispel, or you can just run into them and get feared. I tried to dispel one of the fear, but a few of them were left over, and he got feared again, which is unfortunate. These animated guardians have a frontal slam that they use. I like to use my Typhoon to stop the slam if it looks like it's going to be in an inconvenient spot. You can see this guy that we pulled first was slamming our tank and our melee DPS while they were trying to group up the mobs. So I used Typhoon here to interrupt the slam. The slam won't recast, so you can interrupt the slam every 30 seconds. Just be careful not to push these guys behind your tank or whatever. Just be conscious of where you're knocking them. Almost always if you're pulling these 6, you're doing it with Bloodlust, so you shouldn't need to do much tank healing or much worry on this pack because your tank's going to be juiced up. I end up throwing Ironbark on there once his pre-incarn or whatever runs out. You can soothe these guys. They have an enrage effect, but they don't really hit that hard, so I choose not to spend the global on the soothe unless I feel like my tank is really in trouble. This goes pretty quick. We just are killing the guardians. We can move on a little bit past the RP. We also decide to skip the Obelisk. We will do that Obelisk with the last boss, which is probably not something you will do in Pugs, but at least you can... I'll explain why we're doing it. So this is another room with the ghost fear mob minion guys that fear you. So if it's a week like Bullstring where you can't do them with other mobs, you need to do the strategy or some sort of weird mass root thing. The strategy that most groups use here is they have the rogue go right where they spawn. The rogue will use cloak and possibly parry. It looks like he didn't use it, so the rogue uses cloak and then soaks up all the fear mobs and then immediately vanishes to drop combat so he can get back to us. That way we don't have to worry about those fear mobs coming in later on. So these packs can be pretty dangerous. The most dangerous part about the packs is the Witch Doctor casters. The Deathly Chill will do a lot of tank damage, and the Shadow Bolt Volley will just immediately wipe your team if it goes off on a higher key. The champion also has a lot of health, so I'm prioritizing all my damage on those targets. You can see I'm using my Rip and my Rake on the champion because it has the highest health. The champion has an enrage effect that seemingly lasts forever and stacks up, so it's a good idea to soothe that when you can. That one actually does do a lot of damage, especially because it activates sort of like midway through the pull when your tank is starting to run out of stuff. These tornadoes that are cast by the warriors are a bit annoying and they do a lot of damage on fortified, so unless I deem the situation very safe to get into cat form and melee, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stand back and moonfire, especially because these pulls are 4 or 5 targets, so you still get lots of value from sunfiring them and moonfiring everything. The order that you pull this room can depend on how your team's cooldowns line up. We choose to go into this pack next, but you could go into the other one if that pack died too fast. Again, I'm trying to prioritize the Witch Doctor and the champion with my damage, throwing Crucibles and Moonfires and stuff on the Witch Doctor. It's a good idea to be focusing down the Witch Doctor, especially here, because that's the situation where people are going to wipe is if the casts go off. You can see that I'm using my Rake and my Rip on the Witch Doctor just to get it out of the way. You can chain these packs together once the Witch Doctor dies. The limiting factor in these pulls is usually the interrupts on the Witch Doctors, so as soon as that dies, we could chain this if we wanted. I focus targeted the champion there just so I can soothe it easily. I think it's a good idea in packs like this where you know exactly what you're going to need to enrage and when to de-enrage it. You just can set it on focus since you don't need to use focus target much as a healer druid anyway. And now we're chaining into these next warriors just to try and speed things up a little bit. This area can get a little bit messy when there are lots of warriors, especially when the pull is moving around. So I choose not to get in melee right away, but looks like there I am. And then I think better of it. I have the champion on focus again, and I can de-enrage that's enrage. Focusing damage on, again, the champion and the witch doctor. These tornadoes are not too bad while the mobs are stationary, but as soon as the tank has to move, it becomes very difficult to not get hit by them. You can see our entire team gets gust slashed there. I choose to trank because you don't really need trank during the boss fight, and it'll help you catch up. So while we go into this boss, I don't know if I'm going to do a boss spotlight on this guy, but what I will do is try and go into depth how I heal him. So the general rotation I use is immediately when I see someone is targeted by Spit Gold, I put my Life Bloom, my Rejuve, and Cenarian Ward on them immediately when talented. Then you want to gauge what sort of defensives they have. If they have their own personal defensive, usually they use it then. If they don't have one and I have Iron Bark available, that's when I use mine. And if nothing is available, then you want to start layering some more hots on them if possible. A Wild Growth and an Efflow just to help some additional healing. You can even trank here just to put the trank hot on them if it's a dire emergency, or if you can get good value from someone else too. Then once you have all your hots and your defensive setup, you want to use 2 regrowths cast every tick of the Spit Gold dot. You should be able to fit 2 in there, and you should also have enough time to throw out a Swift Mend if they are still going to die. I like to use Spirit of Preservation Minor for bigger regrowths, especially for this boss, but for other bosses as well in here. You'll generally see me using that in here. Okay, let's go ahead and move on with the boss. At the beginning, it's a really good idea to pre-pot and do a lot of damage, get all your dots up, because your team will be able to immune the Spit Golds if they have Ice Block, Cloak, all this stuff. So the first one's on me. I don't have my Bark Skin available, however, I'm running Verse Stack, so I'm really tanky anyway, so I might choose not to use Wild Growth or anything to save mana. So you'll see, yeah, I don't Iron Bark myself either. I put my Life Bloom and my Rejuve up, 2 regrowths. Every time the dot ticks, 2 regrowths, and then I use a Swift Mend at the end just because I have 2 charges. The next one is on Junkrat. He has Cloak, so now I can get back into doing damage. Again, just trying to get in as much damage as possible so this guy dies. I see Junkrat gets targeted again. I also see that he's standing at an Eye of Corruption, so I choose to use my Iron Bark here. Then I use my Life Bloom and my Rejuve, 2 regrowths. Then the dot hits him, 2 more regrowths. And you can see that you more or less can maintain mana throughout the fight here. So here, Spit Gold goes out on Chao, and I see he has Ice Block. In Pugs, if you see that someone has an immunity, you might still want to use a couple hots on them, so in case they're falling asleep, you can heal them anyway. Chao happens to be falling asleep here, or maybe I don't know what happened. Maybe he wanted me to ask him to block. So I realized suddenly that he is in trouble because he's not blocking, and I start telling him to block. I don't know why I innervated there. That's kind of a strange innervate. And then the ultimate 5-head mage play is he blocks at the end of the Spit Gold, and then the next Spit Gold targets him, and he actually mitigates 2 of them. So now Chao is targeted again. I see that I do not have my Iron Bark available, and I know he just used stuff. I also see he has 6 stacks of his Eye, so I think here I should use Wild Growth. It looks like I didn't. I don't know if maybe I was just a little rattled by what just happened, but I should have pre-used the Wild Growth here and maybe put an Efflow down on him as well, but I'm ready to use my Swiftmend charges. So you can see here I regrowth, and I just Swiftmend immediately because I know it's going to top him. Then I'm pre-casting my regrowth that's empowered by Soul of the Forest. Next, I get a crit on it, so it full heals him, so I don't need to do any more healing. Again, once someone lives the Spit Gold, you don't need to heal them anymore. So the next one is on me. Again, same drill. Life Bloom, Rejuve. I use my Bark Skin on myself. Looks like I use Wild Growth to try and help top Chao from this Grievous as well. I spawn a thing from beyond, but I have infinite versatility, so it doesn't matter that much. Here again, I see that Junkrat is targeted. I probably shouldn't use Barkskin here because he's running Elusiveness and his Feign is defensive, but I decide to use it anyway. I use only 1 regrowth there because we stack Iron Bark and Feign, so he doesn't need that much of a defensive. It immediately targets me again. I have no Iron Bark or Barkskin. I quickly top myself with a Swiftmend here because I'm a little worried about the first tick. However, I also have a shit ton of versatility, so it doesn't matter that much. You can see my rotation messed up a little bit there. I let my life bloom drop on myself, so that's definitely a mistake. Here you can shift into bear form for the last tick if you're worried about it dying, or you're worrying about dying. It increases your max health. It doesn't reduce the damage in any way, but it makes it a little easier to heal. So here again, it's on Junkrat. He's using his Feign, and I'm using 2 regrowths per tick, standard practice. So it's on me again. I have no defensive again. I probably, again, should have wild growth myself, especially seeing I have a thing from Beyond Cat spawning here. But 2 regrowths in between ticks. I can shift into bear for the last tick. Looks like I didn't. It's on me again. This is where the versatility stack build is shining. So I'm just doing the same thing. You can see my reju falls off there for a second. I decided to use a Swiftman there because I'm falling behind a little bit. And I also realize I might need to move because of all these ads are coming. The first one finally goes on Psycho. He has Blur. Same thing. Rejuve on him. Life Bloom on him. 2 regrowths per tick. This one goes on Junkrat again. The boss fight's been going pretty long at this point, so he actually has his cloak up again to immune it. And then now, for the most part, the boss is dead. Hopefully you can understand a little bit on my thought process of here of how I go through it. It's just simply stacking up hots on the person, using a defensive, using your bark rather, if they don't have one, and then just cranking regrowths. If you're having trouble identifying who has the spit gold right away fast enough to get your hots up, you need to maybe change something about your frames or your bigwigs so that you can see it faster. So now we're going into this pack. This room can be kind of boring. Our Druid has Incarn, so I'm being a little greedy with how much I heal him here. It looks like he's taking some damage, so I do end up throwing some direct heals into him, but he had Frenzied active as well as Incarn, so he doesn't really need that much healing. You can see he's going 3 to 4 stacks of Iron for here. I just came out with my recent video on how to heal Guardian Druids, so you guys should all understand what that means now. I'm not worried at all about moonfiring or dotting these other small mobs. I talk about this a ton, but I'm going to keep talking about it because it's important. This king has 13 million health. All these other guys have 5 million. So it's going to come down to only the king at the end. So any damage that you put on the small guys doesn't really matter that much. So I'm spending all my combo points and all my extra time to damage the king and not the other guys. It looks like Chow had an unfortunate overlap with some sort of swirly and being a mage. I think you can use a normal res here in between these waves, but maybe he wasn't sure, so he just released to get back quickly. He didn't have combust anyway, so he wasn't people. So if you're not familiar with this room, the order in which all these guys spawn is random. Every time you come in here, it'll spawn different packs, so it can be a bit annoying. Some of the packs are much more difficult than others, so if you're trying to plan out a bloodlust in this room. If you're bloodlusting the first pull, you do need to lust this room at some point. So this pack is probably the easiest one. This guy has a Blade Storm, which does a ton of damage if you stand near him, so don't stand near him. Our mage was mind controlled. Luckily, he did not have combust, so these ignites do not hurt, but if you have a mind-controlled mage who ignites people, or someone who gets ignited by a mage, you have to be careful to dispel that quickly. Looks like our bear used Typhoon to knock that Blade Storm guy back, just for a little bit of safety. I see our tank is standing in 24 stacks of his eye, so giving him a little bit more direct healing than I otherwise normally would. And now it looks like our tank is trying to go for the world record of eye stacks. He's sitting in 31. Not too much to do with this pack. We can skip ahead a little bit. This is going to be a long one. Okay, so this pack is very, very heavy tank damage. You have to be really careful to make sure you maintain hots on the tank for these guys. This raptor will jump around, and this hunting leap does a ton of damage on fortified. You can use a lot of different displacement effects to stop that. If you Ursul's Vortex and then he jumps out of the Ursul's, it'll get pulled back and it'll nullify his jump. Also, you can just use Typhoon. We have 2 different Typhoons and 2 different Vortexes, so we can more or less completely nullify this guy while we're just killing the queen. It looks like because we've been pretty quick so far, we're able to lust the last pack, but you may be forced to lust a different pack if you're a little bit behind on time. Part of the reason I think is because we didn't do the spider obelisk in the beginning. That gives us a little more leeway with when we lust. This is the most dangerous pack to deal with as a healer, especially when you're running a lower healing build. This can be really difficult. So Guard Captain has a spell called Axe Barrage. The spell does a lot of damage and it puts a bleed on everybody, but is line of sightable. So you can see what I do here is I move past this wall to line of sight the Axe Barrage. Our mage is also trying to do it as well, but I see that he got affected by it anyway. So I use Iron Bark on him instead of the tank. It's almost always a good idea to use Iron Bark on the tank for this Axe Barrage, but I saw that our tank has Incarn running and a bunch of furs, so I didn't think he would need it, and I barked the mage because our rogue also got affected by it, and it's a bleed, so you can't cloak it or whatever. This is a pack where you usually want to be playing very defensive, especially if you're playing in a pug where they might not be line of sighting this Axe Barrage. I try and do it there, but I was a little slow. I was doing a lot of direct healing on myself, but I have Bark Skin available and I have a ton of versatility, so there's no reason I should have been healing myself. I should have been focusing my heals on my rogue and my tank at this point. This is something that I've been working on a lot in my own gameplay now that I'm a lot tankier than I'm used to. Before I'm used to me being a liability and having to worry about myself a lot, but I now have to worry about others a lot more than myself. The other thing I failed to mention is that this king has a channel lightning ability. If it goes off, it does a lot of damage to everyone around him. However, you can displace it to interrupt it. I guess interrupt isn't the right word, because if you displace while it's casting, it'll actually just immediately recast. So you have to wait for the cast to finish, then displace it. You can see what happened right there was our tank typhooned it, but it was just a split second too early, and then it immediately recasted. So now I'm going to typhoon it. You see how I wait for the cast to finish before I do? It didn't matter a whole lot because this pack was dead. So now on to this fear guy. I'm probably going to be more or less skipping a lot of the obelisks in these videos now just because they're all the same. One thing to note about this one is there are some severe line of sight issues with these stairs. So you have to be really, really careful with where you stand. Everyone's going to be trying to spread out to not fear each other, but also you'll have issues with line of sight here. Otherwise, nothing too crazy. We can skip ahead. We're pulling this guy. This guy has this weird beam. As far as I know, there's no way to dodge it as a tank. It's like a 50-50. You can't reliably dodge it. Maybe some people will say you can, but be prepared to heal your tank if they get hit by this. It'll always be targeting the tank, so you can just stand behind the mob. And it should never hit you. This ground effect here, this purification strike, doesn't actually do that much damage. It looks super, super scary on the ground, but it actually does nothing. So, it does something. It does a non-zero amount, but it does not do a lethal amount. So feel free to just run through it if needed, if you're worried about getting hit by the beam. The beam is much more dangerous than the... You can see the ground effect. My health is barely going down. I guess there it went down a little bit. Anyway, we'll skip ahead of here. This guy's kind of boring too. So next is the blob room. This blob room can be very, very difficult. It looks like our bear just went off into the blob room with this guy still here. It's pretty brave of him. The blob room can be more or less difficult depending on the week's affixes. This week, it's not too bad at all because we're only having to worry about Sanguine. Here we're going to get into cat form a little bit to pad. Be really careful because these swirlies only target ranged, and so you're going to be getting swirlies on you. If you stand on top of your tank or your DPS, you're going to risk them getting hit by them as well. It'll also go on the mage as well. So we decided to pull one of these big guys with the blobs just for better combust value. So the way these big guys work is they will entomb a random DPS player. Once the DPS player is entombed, it'll go on the closest coffin to them. So you can see I'm already standing by this one because I know he's going to be put in this one because this is the closest one we are. You can actually drag this guy to the other side and it'll put you in the closest coffin to you, not to the mob. So you can always control which coffin you get put in. We're cleaving down the blobs with this guy. I don't know if this is a major time save because we still have to kill the other one at the end. Our tank doing his best job as a bear driver, trying to not sanguinate anything. Since we combusted this guy, he's real low. Again, it's important that everyone is close to the same coffin so you know where they're going to get put. I know that they're going to get put into this coffin right here, so I'm already pre-moving to it so I can click on it quickly. Another thing that I didn't mention about the poison from the blobs is that you can actually shapeshift it, so never worry about dispelling it off yourself, just dispel it off of your teammates. When you pull two of them together, they're both trying to entomb, you can get some weird effects, so just be ready to have some, let's say, bugs happen if you try and pull both of these at the same time. Ideally, you try and pull them separately so that they don't entomb people at the same time. That way their casts don't get synced. But if they are entombing two different people at the same time or the same person twice, weird things can happen. So we can skip ahead here a little bit. Okay, so a really common question on my stream is, how do you bug this boss? This boss has a phase that he goes into where he entombs one player into a random coffin, and then he starts running to all the coffins to open them. If you save the entombed player instantaneously while he's still phasing, he gets stuck in that phase and doesn't use any of his abilities. So the way that we accomplish this is, as soon as this drain fluid goes out, everyone goes to their own coffin. So there's 4 different coffins in the room. There's going to be 1 player entombed, and there's going to be 4 different players. Then we all go to the coffin. The person who's entombed has to rapidly click the shake button so we know which one we can safely open. As soon as you see the shake on your tomb, you click on it. If you do it right, like hopefully we did here, you open the player in the middle of the boss trying to phase, and the boss doesn't do anything. The way that you'll know that it worked is the boss normally will then cast his spells right here, but he's not going to cast them here because he's bugged, and now you just sit here and attack the boss. This boss fight can actually take a very, very long time if you do not do this bug, so you'll see this very, very common, and every single top group will be doing this. I think it's probably a loss of almost a full minute if you don't execute this properly. But not much to say about this fight now that he doesn't do anything. So we can skip ahead. Okay, he's still doing nothing. Okay, so now we're going into this area. Almost everything up until this point is fairly easy and there's not any really high risk pulls. Once you get into this area, this is where things start to get really, really dangerous. So here we opt to Shroud to get to this Obelisk. This is for Lust cooldown. This is so we want to be able to pull all 5 of these mobs together and lust them. We do not do it in this dungeon because we're ahead on time and it's a 26. The route was sort of designed for a 27, as silly as that sounds. But so we don't have lust up, but we're still executing the pull anyway. So there's lots of stuff going on in this pull, and it's important to understand all these different mobs. So these raptors are the same raptor that you see in the gauntlet. They leap on a random player and then use their hunting leap ability, which does a ton of damage. You can use Ursul's Vortex to pull them back when they try and leap. You can also use Typhoon in an emergency to stop it, but you have to be careful with knocking them too far away. The Berserker also puts out a bleed. The bleed targets the nearest player and is an insane damage over time effect that takes a ton of healing, so you have to be really, really careful with who it goes on. It can be okay to go on the tank, but it does stack, so you only want 1 stack on the tank at a time. You can use some other effects to negate it. You can use a rogue parry to stop it. You can also use Demon Hunter Blade Dance. Common strategy is either if a group has a Demon Hunter, the Demon Hunter can try and be the closest person to Blade Dance it. Also, you can use a Hunter Pet and just stick the Hunter Pet on the Berserker and it will target it. You can use that strategy with any sort of minion. If you have a Boomkin Treants or Unholy DK minions, all those things can take the bleeds. On top of that, you have this Poison Barrage. You should generally try and take the Poison Barrage out. It can be hard to know where your team is. In this situation, you can see we had multiple players affected by it. Luckily, a bear tank can also cleanse the poison, so we can cleanse both of them right away. We have it designated for the person with poison barrage to run to here, so that's when I got targeted, that's where I ran to. But it's a good idea. You can see our rogue and demon hunter stunning that barrage just so it doesn't go off anyway, because sometimes it can cause havoc. I'm looking at throwing a vortex on the brute. Vortex doesn't actually put you in combat, so you can use it to slow down patrols. We did distract it there. Our rogue distracted, that's why I didn't choose to use it there. I just held on to it. We then lust this pack. This is not normally our lust, but this is also a very dangerous pack too. These Hex Priest have a bolt that does a ton of tank damage. You have to be really careful. You can see there that our tank is eating one of the bleeds. So this is a spot where even though my tank is at full health, I'm constantly trying to keep my hot supplied and juicing him up because his health can go down very quickly. It's a common strategy to let these hexes go off on your teammates because you can just dispel them quickly and they have a long cast time. You would rather have the Hex Priest casting the hex that you can dispel than casting the bolt that does a ton of damage. We also have 3 dispels for curses on both of our druids and our mage, so that's another part of the reason we let those hexes go off. But in a less coordinated group, it might be a good idea to not do that. One thing is that Sanguine hasn't really been too big of an issue in this dungeon. Most of the trash packs in King's Rest are one at a time and also pretty small, so we haven't got to talk a lot about how to manage Sanguine here. But I guess it is important to note that this is a Sanguine week. I would say this is a really good week for King's Rest because Sanguine isn't a big factor, and also because the third boss order is somewhat favorable. This can be a really dangerous area with all these growths in the way. There's no way to escape the growths. You need to either kill them or just walk through them. So you can see I'm taking my time here. I waited like 10 or 15 seconds to go through, and then even that was too early. And now I'm like running back here because our tank is moving slowly because he doesn't want to walk through the growths. Just be conscious of where your tank is tanking this guy and try and stay near him. Generally, most problems with the obelisks happen when people are not coordinated and they're doing different things. So as long as you're following your team around and you have a good idea of what they're trying to do, there shouldn't be too many problems. We can skip ahead a little bit here. So now we're on to the third boss. The most dangerous part of this boss is Kula the Butcher. This boss in difficulty varies greatly depending on who the boss targets with the abilities. So like the bleeds, you can use certain abilities to stop it. A rogue can parry, a demon hunter can blade dance. So ideally, if it ever goes on one of them, they can immune at least one of them. A mage can ice block, and pallies can use bop or bubble to get rid of it as well. However, there are some situations where you get the bleed and you can't do anything about it. For instance, if it goes on yourself, it can be quite unfortunate. So this first one goes on Chow. He can block it. And there's not much to say at this part other than you're trying to do as much damage as possible because you want as few bleeds as possible going out on your team. Best case scenario is that you end up to this boss with multiple B reses. You can see here in the bottom left, barely, we have 3 battle reses on our team. The next one goes on Junkrat, and he's able to parry it. It looks like this boss is going to go down pretty easily. There, again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of randomness to whether or not how difficult this boss is, but what you want to do is just go into it with battle reses so that just in case you get unlucky and someone gets targeted multiple times. This one goes on Junkrat, and I don't know what he did there, but he did something. It looks like he natural dodged it. So a lot of people are going to say, oh, that didn't help you. That was super easy. But there's not really any secret to how you heal the bleeds once it goes on somebody. There's no magic spell that you can learn from the Dream Grove that does a ton of single target healing. At the end of the day, you just have to use every single hot on the guy and spam regrowths. If you use your Swift Mends intelligently in your Bark Skin, I tend to use all my stuff as early as possible just because I want... Like, who knows how many bleeds will go out, and even if you can just save one person from a bleed, it's good. There's no secret formula to keeping someone alive. There have been times when lots of people have gotten targeted. With the Verse Soul Prosperity build, especially with Stonebark, it's actually kind of easy to save people, but on a high Tyrannical key, like if this was a Tyrannical 26, I don't even know if it's possible to save someone from that bleed. So these totems actually scale with Fortified, so you'll see me chasing after the explosive totem to help kill it. Some classes have problems killing the totems. For example, a mage isn't going to do much damage to it, and a demon hunter could barely do any damage at all, so it's mostly on me and the rogue. You can't actually ignite the totems with, you know, a strong combust, but unless there's a combust up, the mage isn't going to be doing much damage to the totems. There's not really much to this boss, it's just a kick rotation. I'd like to use my tank external like Bark in this phase when everyone's running around, just because I think this is the most likely situation where things are going to be not coordinated and people are going to be missing kicks because the boss is moving around everywhere and everyone's running to the totems. But at this point, I am just doing DPS. You can see I'm still playing fairly safe, keeping my life fluid and my rejuve and stuff on the tank. This is probably a good time to use Bark, but I saved my combo points there. I wanted to have a 5 combo point bite as well as my Crucible just to kill that totem. We've had problems with killing the totems quickly on Fortified weeks, so that's part of the reason why I'm doing that. Especially in a less coordinated group, you should probably take it upon yourself to save up damage for it and kill it, because you never know what your team's going to do. There's not too much to this boss, you're just dodging stuff. You can use your dots to slowly kill the totems. You'll find that melee players don't kill these totems because they don't bother them, so you may have to go around and kill them yourself as a healer. The last boss here is the Conqueror, the charge one. Akali, you prefer to have her at the very end because you don't want to have to deal with these charges while you're dealing with the other mechanics. This is part of the reason why I say this week is favorable for KR. That charge is a soak mechanic. It seems to act very strangely sometimes. Sometimes it seems like people just don't get affected. I've heard different theories as to whether or not if someone natural dodges or parries, it soaks part of the damage or not. But either way, just be prepared for this charge to act weird. I try to pre-bear it and use stuff like Iron Bark there. Like you can see, I don't know what exactly happened there, but our rogue just died somehow, even though we were all soaking it. But hey, that's what battle reses are for. I think Chow actually dies this next one. I remember a key where I barked Chow and then he didn't get hit, and then I barked him again, and then I didn't have bark and he died instantly to the charge. Like everyone's soaking it, and then nope. Okay, never mind. Maybe that was a different key. But there's not much to this. So this debilitating backhand puts a debuff on the tank that makes him take a ton of damage. So you have to be careful if your tank might not be aware that that's on. Hopefully your tank should know to run away when that's on them, because this boss is very, very slow. But if your tank is not, you can choose to taunt the boss off of the tank and run around. I believe the debuff lasts 9 seconds. Not much going on here, just finishing the boss. So up until this point, we've killed almost everything. This is because this bridge is one of the most dangerous parts of the dungeon, and we want to skip as many mobs as possible here. So what we're doing is we're waiting for this brute to patrol away, because we don't want to pull it. We don't want to pull it. We don't want to pull this double berserker pack. We don't want to pull this 5-pack. You don't want to pull any of this if you don't have to. It's very nice that there are 2 obelisks here, so even without Shroud, you can use this. You can be skipping these mobs. So normally we wait a little bit and we line the mobs up better, but it seems like Shroud broke or something happened there, so I just Typhoon quickly because I was a little worried that stuff was going to go wrong. But we're taking this pack now, we're slowly moving it onto the bridge so that we don't have to worry about the brute. This is maybe not recommended. If I was in a pug group, I would probably just have killed the brute earlier and then done this pack normally, because this can be a very dangerous spot to fight this pack. The Beastmaster Poison Barrage, it can be very hard to see where it is, and you have much less room to move around. The Raptor Leap, you also have less room to dodge. On top of that, it's very hard to see the anything that's going on the ground with anything in this pack. Part of the reason that makes this pack very difficult is the next mob is Zool. So your team is saving all of their big cooldowns for Zool. It looks like our Demon Hunter meted here, which is actually kind of cool, because normally this pack takes a very long time. Okay, so on to Zool. Again, there's a lot of people ask for how to heal stuff like Zool and Spit Gold. There really is no secret method. There's no secret spell that you can use that does insane single target healing, or no judo rotation that you can use to do, you know, the only thing that you're doing is putting literally every single hot on the target, and spamming regrowth is the best that you can do. So I have 5 combo points here. We'll see if I was feeling spicy, and I'm going to unload them on the boss. Also, we're waiting for Bloodlust. On Fortified, it's a good idea to Bloodlust Zool, and we have 18 seconds left, as you can see in the top right. So we're not going to risk pulling Zool without Bloodlust. You can see our pull timer there since we're so far ahead on time. I'm interested to see if I use my combo points or not. Looks like I'm not. So Zool Shadow Barrage, it does initial damage as well as a dot, and those things can overlap, so you just need to be spamming as many heals as possible onto the tank. I'm trying to put my Moonfire, Sunfire, and Crucible on the boss as soon as possible. Now I'm just applying every single hot I have. I have Efflo, Rejuve, Regrowth, Life Bloom, Swiftmend. These circles that spawn, if they're very close to your team, you have to soak them, but they have a very, very short range. You can see where I'm standing. I'm not even affected by it. Usually the strategy is to just walk away from those. It's not a good idea to soak them because you don't want to be moving around and losing damage on this boss. So I pop Innervate here. You probably won't run out of mana with Bloodlust, but it's a good idea to do anyway in case things go south. And you know, there's no special. It looks like I'm getting into cat form and finally spending my combo points. It's not because I'm trying to be cool, just because I want this boss to die. Every single spell in the tank, when that explosion thing goes off, I choose to use Trank, just to top up everyone to not have to worry about Grievous. When that explosion thing ends, also, it creates a mob that will chase you and fear you. So as soon as it spawns, I wild charge back to the tank to give my team time to dispel it, since I can't do much of it as a druid. And you can see I'm just spamming every hot I have, keeping my Efflo up, keeping my wild growth up. I'm trying to space out my Swiftmends and not overlap. There is a circle that spawned in melee, so our tank took a little extra damage. That's why I sort of fired off my Swiftmend quick. Our tank also has 2 charges of Survival Instincts as well as his Incarn here, so it's not super scary. I'm not worried about healing the Grievous off of any of my teammates. I see my mage is sitting in an eye and has 2 stacks of Grievous, but none of that matters. Another thing is, remember, the dot lives after, or the dot persists after Zool dies, so I'm still healing our tank here because you don't want your tank to die to the dot after. It's hitting him for like a third of his health still. So this is something that you probably will not see in Pugs, but it's something that people are doing in the highest keys, is we're actually doing 2 Obelisks with the last boss. I will go over it, although it may not be something that's that applicable to your keys. It's still fun to talk about because this is kind of a difficult pull. So one thing to note is, since there are 3 mobs, it can be very difficult for the tank to get threat on everything right away. So be very careful with applying your dots and spamming a lot of heals right away. Make sure you let the tank get his spells out and get threat. I get targeted by the poison from the kick ad, and I live because I have 60% versatility. I'm choosing to stand in the middle of the room here. I try and stand in the middle of the room for this so that I'm not in the way of our tank. The strategy that we're using is we're having our tank and our melee stand on the outside of the room, and the 2 range players are standing on the inside of the room. You can dodge this Quaking Leap with Wild Charge. However, since there's a lot of stuff going on and I don't want to risk it, you can also use Dash to get out of it. So I'm just using Dash and running away. In case of emergency, if you're running Verse Stack, you can also just pop Barkskin and just move slowly as a bear. I believe the leap does physical damage, so that's why I shift into bear form as well. Again, trying to stay as far away from the squad as possible so that I'm not baiting these puddles or the gust slashes or anything towards them. Primarily focusing my healing on the tank. It might look like my mana isn't looking great because my mana is dipping into 50% and the boss is still at 80, but this is the most difficult part of this pull. It looks like I decide to go behind the boss. It's because I'm worried about Raban spawning and that I'm gonna pull threat from Raban. If your tank is worried about other things, he might not be able to get Raban right away. So I go over there and I just so that I don't get healing threat. As a healer, you should be worried first about threat issues, because anything that doesn't get tagged by the tank, you're always going to pull threat on it as a healer. There, I Typhoon the Hunting Leap, both to stop it and also to get it back into the melee so that they can cleave it down. You can see our mage is combusting here, so it's a good time for it. You can see that the thing from beyond, although it seems scary with most build, I'm sitting at 67% versatility, and getting hit by it does almost nothing. I would only be running thing from beyond while I am running a versatility stack, but you can see it's doing 20% of my health or something, so it's barely even noticeable that it's hitting me. But again, I wouldn't recommend running it unless you're running a versatility stack. I'm getting absolutely assaulted. I'm getting absolutely assaulted by thing from beyond here, but that's okay. Now, once all the ads are gone, this is where the boss gets easy. There's one little phase where it's difficult, and that's when Tizala spawns. So Tizala adds a new fear ability that only persists while Tizala is alive. You have to be very careful about the fear. I just decide to bark skin and bear form that because I have such high versatility, but if you don't have bark skin available, you may want to try and wild charge it. So now that Tizala spawns, periodically he's going to use Deathly Roar. You have to be very careful about this because it's going to fear your tank, and if it lines up with blade combo like it is here, Dazar is going to be blade comboing your tank from behind. So we popped a lot of defensives there. I had Bark and he had, I don't know what he had. I think he used his N'Zoth trinket. It went away so quick. You have to dedicate all your defensives to these moments when you can see we're getting very unlucky with the tank getting feared and then getting blade comboed while he's feared. As much as I want to try and top on my other teammates, it's very, very important in this moment to keep pots on your tank. Also, one thing I like to do is actually stay far away for that, because if the tank dies, which does happen, you'll be able to battle res and you have more time to get away from the boss. You can actually taunt the boss and battle res and then run around as a druid if you have dash up. We'll see if I try and wild charge this. Nope. Because it's safer, I've just been bear forming it. I don't think you can bear form it if you're not running verse stack, but since I've been running this really tanky build with avoidance and verse, I just bear form it for safety. But if you're running a traditional haste mastery build, especially without so much avoidance, you may need to learn how to wild charge that. I believe you wild charge when the cast is like 0.5 to 0.3 seconds from going off. But now that Tizala is dead, there's not really too much to this boss. It's a good idea to tank the boss here, because if it does the attack where the spears go in a circle around the room, they start right next to you, so you have infinite time to react. Let's see if I wild charge here. Nope. Just bark, bear form, we live. Alright, well, that about wraps up the video. I promise we timed it, don't worry. Thanks for watching. If you guys have suggestions as to what key you'd like to see next, or anything that you feel like I missed, or any questions you have about King's Rest, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be making one of these for every dungeon, as well as stuff for Shadowlands as well when that comes out. Thanks again for watching, and happy keying.